Everyone thought Cody's focus was on Saturday night, but what he revealed about SmackDown left even the commentators speechless. This wasn't part of the script. It was real. To understand Cody Rhodes, you have to understand the weight of the story he carries. It's not just his own, it's his father's. Every time he walks through that curtain, he's carrying the dreams of a generation. Finish the story became more than a catchphrase. It was a promise, a burden, and a destiny all rolled into one. Backstage, his preparation was a masterclass in focus. While others were loose and loud, Cody was often quiet, insulated by the sheer gravity of his mission. He was the perfect prodigal son, the polished professional who understood that every word, every gesture, was part of a larger narrative. The pressure of that is immense. It's one thing to be a top star, it's another to be the living embodiment of a legacy. The expectation wasn't just for him to win, but to win in a way that honored everything that came before him. You could feel that pressure in the air around him. It was a quiet, constant hum. He was playing a role that was, in fact, his real life, and the line between the man and the mission had become so blurred, it was impossible to see where one ended and the other began. He wasn't just performing. He was trying to bend reality to match the narrative everyone, including himself, so desperately wanted to be true. The lights hit him as his music faded, and the roar of the SmackDown crowd was deafening. It was a familiar scene, one we had witnessed dozens of times. He stood in the center of the ring, tailored suit immaculate, microphone in hand. On the monitors backstage, we could see the prompter with his key points. The producers in the gorilla position were ready with their cues. The segment was planned down to the second. A standard, triumphant address to the fans, a look towards the next challenge, another brick in the road to finishing his story. Everything was perfect. But if you knew him, if you had seen him in these moments before, you could spot it. A slight hesitation before he raised the mic. A look in his eyes that wasn't directed at the crowd, but somewhere far away, somewhere inward. There was a tension in his shoulders that the suit couldn't hide. The confident smile he wore felt like a placeholder for something else, something deeper and far more complex. He was there to play his part, to deliver the lines everyone expected to hear. But in that brief, silent moment, it felt as though the man was having a quiet, fierce argument with the legend he was supposed to be. He began as planned. The familiar cadence, the gratitude for the fans, the confident talk of the future. He was hitting all his marks and the crowd was hanging on every word. But then, midway through a sentence, he just stopped. The silence that followed was one of the loudest things I've ever heard. It was only for a few seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. The roar of thousands of people slowly died down, replaced by a confused, uncertain murmur. A sea of faces, once cheering, were now tilted in question. On camera, the director held the shot on Cody's face. His expression was unreadable. Backstage, a quiet panic began to set in. "What's happening?" someone whispered over the headset. "Is his mic dead?" another asked. You could feel the rigid structure of live television starting to tremble. The producers were frozen, their hands hovering over buttons, unsure of what to do. There was no protocol for this. Performers don't just stop. They don't forget their lines. Not at this level. Not in this moment. The energy in the entire building shifted from celebration to a deep, collective anxiety. The story had hit a full stop, and no one, including the man in the ring, seemed to know what the next word was supposed to be. When he finally spoke again, the polished performer was gone. His voice was lower, more reflective. He completely abandoned the topic he was on. "You know," he started, looking not at the cameras but at the blue ropes of the ring. "My father. He never got to perform in this exact building, but he built territories on the same foundation that this show, SmackDown, stands on." The air went out of the production truck. This wasn't on the script. This wasn't an ad-lib. This was a complete departure. He wasn't talking about his opponents or his championship goals. He was talking about history, about legacy, in a way that was intensely personal and raw. He spoke about the soul of professional wrestling, about what it meant to be a workhorse on a Friday night, to deliver for the people who spent their hard-earned money to be there. The confusion backstage morphed into stunned silence. The writers were looking at each other, scripts now useless in their hands. He wasn't just going off script, he was writing a new one, live, in front of the world, and no one had any idea where he was going with it. He was no longer the American Nightmare. He was just the son of Dusty Rhodes, speaking his heart. This was his real plan. It wasn't about a contract, a brand switch, or a new challenger. It was deeper. He looked directly into the main camera, but he wasn't addressing the fans anymore. He was addressing the industry. "Finishing the story," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was never just about a title. It's about finishing his work. It's about making sure that the heart of this business continues to beat." He revealed an ambition no one knew he had, to use his influence not just to win matches, but to fundamentally reshape the identity of SmackDown, to make it the show defined by bell-to-bell action, by authentic characters, by the kind of grit and soul his father championed. He was talking about changing the philosophy of a billion-dollar brand from the inside out. He wasn't asking for permission. He was making a declaration. This was his true purpose. The title was a symbol, but this was the real legacy. The mask of the white-meat babyface, the corporate-friendly hero, it didn't just crack, it fell away completely, revealing a revolutionary with his father's spirit burning in his eyes. He wasn't just here to be on the show, he was here to become its conscience. The ripple effect was instantaneous. In the commentary booth, the announcers were completely silent. Their notes were irrelevant, their planned sound bites forgotten. They were watching not as employees but as fans, utterly captivated by the raw honesty of the moment. Backstage, the usual hustle and bustle had ceased. A crowd of wrestlers, men and women who were normally getting ready for their own matches, were now gathered silently around the monitors. Their faces were a mixture of shock, awe, and, for some, profound understanding. This wasn't an angle. This felt like a mission statement for their entire generation. In the gorilla position, where the show is meticulously managed, the director had stopped giving orders. Everyone, from the top executives to the camera operators, was simply witnessing. They knew this was a turning point. The carefully constructed narrative of the show had just been hijacked by its biggest star, who was now steering it into uncharted waters. The script was dead, the segment time was blown, but nobody cared. They were watching a man risk everything, not for a storyline, but for an ideal. Live television had rarely felt so alive. He set the microphone down gently in the middle of the ring. He didn't drop it for emphasis. He placed it as if leaving an offering. There was no catchphrase to end the segment, no pose for the cameras. He simply stood there for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. The crowd's reaction was a slow, rising wave. It started as a stunned silence which then gave way to a low hum of understanding and finally erupted into a roar of profound respect. It was a different kind of ovation. It wasn't the explosive pop for a finishing move. It was deeper, more meaningful, the sound of thousands of people recognizing a moment of pure, unvarnished truth. As he walked back up the ramp, his face was not one of triumph, but of relief, as if a great weight had finally been lifted. The performance was over. The character had been shed. The man who walked back through the curtain was not the American Nightmare who had walked out. He was someone more real, more vulnerable, and infinitely more powerful because of it. He had left the story behind, and in its place had given everyone a piece of his soul. The atmosphere backstage when he returned was not one of anger or confusion, but of quiet reverence. As he walked through the hallway, the usual chatter stopped. People didn't congratulate him or slap him on the back. They just nodded, their expressions conveying a deep, unspoken respect. He had broken every rule of a modern, highly produced television promo, yet he had accomplished something that no script could ever achieve. He had made it real. He walked past producers and executives, the very people whose plans he had just upended. They didn't reprimand him. They just watched him go, their faces a mixture of shock and admiration. In that moment, he was more than just their top star. He was the embodiment of the spirit they were all supposed to be chasing. No one knew what the professional fallout would be, what conversations would be had behind closed doors, but everyone in that building knew they had just been part of something that would be talked about for years. It was the rare moment when the business of wrestling was completely overshadowed by the heart of it, all because one man decided to speak his truth. In the days that followed, the internet would debate endlessly. Was it a work? Was it a shoot? Was it a new storyline? But that entire conversation missed the point. What happened in that ring wasn't about creating a buzz or starting an angle. It was a moment of absolute clarity. For months, Cody had been living under the immense pressure of a single, defined quest. Finish the story. It was a powerful narrative, but also a restrictive one. It threatened to reduce his entire journey and his father's legacy to a single accomplishment. His promo wasn't a rebellion against the company. It was a rebellion against that simplification. It was the act of a man reclaiming his own narrative. The mask that cracked that night wasn't a character's facade. It was the mask of the perfect media-trained hero who always says the right thing. He showed everyone that his real quest was not just to win the prize his father never could, but to champion the ideals his father always did. It was a moment not of defiance, but of profound devotion, ensuring the story was not just about a title, but about a legacy that breathes. We are drawn to these figures, these modern-day gladiators, because we want to believe in their stories. We want the heroes to be flawless, the quests to be noble, and the endings to be satisfying. But we often forget the person who has to live inside that story, the one who carries the weight of all our expectations. That night, Cody Rhodes reminded us that the most powerful stories aren't the ones that are perfectly told, but the ones that are painfully true. He risked the simple, triumphant narrative the world wanted for him in order to pursue a more complicated, meaningful one of his own. The world will remember the promo, the words, and the shock. But for those who truly understood, the real takeaway was watching a man, caught between his destiny and his duty, choose to be honest instead of perfect. It stands as a quiet, emotional reflection, a reminder that even legends are human and, sometimes, the mask cracks.